It's difficult being a woman in a men's prison. I've been incarcerated now for 14 and a half years.
So this man has been an inmate in a male prison for 14 and a half years, but he has a desire to transfer to a women's prison. Listen to him explain in his own words what he did to end up in prison.
It was a crime spree. I was robbing women for their accessories, their purses, their makeup.
So he was specifically targeting women.
I'll be taking that.
Now he wants to be transferred to a women's prison? Well, of course he does. And the crazy thing is, inmates like him have and will continue to get their wishes granted.
California has passed legislation allowing transgender inmates in the state's correctional facilities to be assigned housing based on their gender identity.
That's when the males started, by the numbers, identifying themselves as females.
In September, California Governor Gavin Newsom signed Senate Bill 132 into law.
We had to transfer male inmates to female institutions. Oh, they were excited. They were like kids in a candy store because they knew they were going from a men's prison to a female's prison. So when the Department of Corrections started doing all this implementation, they had an ISU sergeant, an investigative service unit sergeant, give the whole prison a class on how we will now be calling the inmates by the pronoun that they would like to be called as. You did have your legitimate individuals that identified as transgenders. However, when the state of California, the Department of Corrections, gave them the full authorization to do as they pleased, you had everybody jump on that program. A lot of non-authentic and a lot of manipulation of the system. Oh, it was obvious. They were telling us, this is what we're doing. Why not?
Hello everyone, if you're a new viewer, welcome. If you're a returning viewer, welcome back. If this is your second or fourth time watching one of my videos and you are not yet subscribed, we already go together. Okay, make it official and hit that subscribe button. Today I want to talk about how this whole gender ideology nonsense has infiltrated the criminal justice system and has turned into a three-ring circus of sorts.
Oh my God!
I'm convinced that all of these activists in favor of men being housed in prison with women eat Tide Pods for breakfast. The gentleman in the opening clip, who I think I can safely assume has never eaten a Tide Pod before, his name is Hector Bravo Farrell, and he is a former lieutenant of a high security prison in San Diego, California. Hector decided to quit his job as a result of the unsafe working conditions, and he has since become a whistleblower, and he does actually have a YouTube channel, so if you guys want to check him out. But Hector has spoken up about the increase in men identifying as women simply to game the system and to fulfill their predatory desires. For example, when a male inmate in a male prison self-identifies as a woman, he can then demand that his strip searches be done by a female corrections officer, and according to Hector, this has become increasingly prevalent in the male prison system. So now there are female officers who are essentially being forced to carry out searches on unclothed men, and these unclothed men are gaining personal gratification from it. Ew. And of course, if the officers don't feel comfortable doing it, it can be viewed as discrimination. There's also male inmates who are in prison for violent crimes such as crimes against children, sexual assault, attempted murder, or murder, and they are happily gaming the system. Once in prison, these men then claim to identify as women, and they then request to be transferred to a women's facility, and for many of them, their wishes are granted, even in the cases where they present a clear threat to women. And I always wondered, like, who are the people that are approving these prison transfers? Like, in my head, they look like this, or they look like this. But in actuality, they look like this. This is a judge named Sarah Netburn, and just listen to Senator Ted Cruz question her on her decision to allow a male inmate to transfer to a women's facility.
In your court, what matters more? The rights of individuals or your political ideology?
I apply the law to the facts.
I asked a question, which matters more?
Well, my political ideology doesn't matter at all.
Okay, so I don't believe you. And I think this case demonstrates that you are willing to subjugate the rights of individuals to satisfy your political ideology. This case involves a male defendant who raped a 9-year-old boy. Was he guilty of that?
Yes, the petitioner pled guilty to that.
Okay, so he raped a 9-year-old boy. He also raped a 17-year-old girl. Was he guilty of that?
Guilty. The petitioner pled guilty to that crime as well.
So was he guilty?
I hope so, because she pled guilty to it.
He was a he when he did this.
That's correct.
And also criminal deviant conduct, which the record doesn't disclose what that was exactly. Then, after serving in prison, Mr. McLean was released for parole, but then violated the terms of parole by having internet and was sent back to prison. 1 year after being released again, he was convicted of having child pornography. Is that correct?
I'm unclear on exactly the time frame that you're at, but the petitioner was convicted of distributing child pornography.
Child pornography that was images of adults violently raping children.
Abhorrent conduct.
Okay.
For which there are real victims.
And this individual, 6'2", biologically a man. A minute ago, you said that when this man decided that he was a she, you said this individual was, quote, I wrote it down, sober and entirely a female. That phrase struck me as remarkable. Did this individual have male?
I think what I said, or at least what
that is a verbatim quote, entirely a female.
Sorry, what I meant to say was hormonally a female.
Okay, but that's not entirely. Did this individual have male genitalia?
Yes.
So you took a 6'2" serial child rapist with male genitalia, and he said, you know, I'd like to be in a women's prison. And your answer was, that sounds great to me. Let me ask you something. The other women in that prison, do they have any rights?
Is that a question you're asking me?
Yes, the other women in that prison, do they have any rights?
Of course.
Do they have the right not to have a 6'2" man who is a repeat serial rapist put in as their cellmate?
Senator Cruz, I considered the facts presented to me, and I reached a decision
I asked you a
based on what
question.
the law
I asked
is.
you a question. Do they have a right not to have a 6'2" man who is a serial rapist put in as their cellmate? Do those women have a right to that?
Every person who's incarcerated has the right to be safe in their space.
But you didn't think so. You didn't think so. And in fact, I'm going to give some quotes from your order because Senator Kennedy is right. This is not a judge's order. This is a political activist. By the way, the beginning of your order says, at birth, people are typically assigned a gender. I got to say that would astonish a lot of Americans. A lot of Americans think you go to the hospital, a baby is born, and congratulations, you have a little boy, a little girl. The assigned a gender, I know you went to Brown, but it sounds like it's in a college faculty lounge with no bearing on reality. The Bureau of Prison argued what I'm saying right now, that if you put this person in a female prison, there will be a risk of sexual assault to the women. And you know what you did? You said you didn't care about the women. I'm going to quote what you wrote. You wrote, quote, the Bureau of Prisons claim penological interest in protecting female prisoners from sexual violence and trauma. This interest is legitimate. That's kind of you to say. But there are no signs that petitioner is at risk of reoffending. The record is devoid of evidence of incidents of violence or assault during petitioner's incarceration when she was the perpetrator, only the victim. A theoretical risk of sexual assault by the prisoner without more cannot support the BOP's position. In what universe is someone who is a serial repeat child rapist not at a risk of reoffending?
Senator, as I do in every case.
Okay, I know you've been told to repeat the line, I follow the law. I asked a question. In what universe is someone who is a serial repeat child rapist not at risk of reoffending?
Sir, I looked at the facts that were before me in this case. All of the evidence, including the statements of every warden who had supervised this petitioner.
You also wrote, the BOP also posits that permitting petitioner to live among women will be traumatizing and possibly dangerous to them. This concern is overblown. I have to say, if I were the father of one of those women and you decided that my daughter's cellmate was going to be a 6'2" man who over and over and over again committed violent sexual assault, I would say the entire justice system is absurd, and it is clear on your record your political ideology matters a heck of a lot more than the rights of those women that you endangered. I think you're a radical, and I think you have no business being a judge.
What an awful woman, and her glasses are ugly. It's irrelevant, but I wanted to say it. Just so you know, the reason that they were doing that hearing is because she is essentially being vetted to receive a promotion to the higher courts. And she was nominated by the most energetic and least dementia-having president in the history of America, the first black woman to be president of America, Joe Biden himself.
By the way, I'm proud to be, as I said, the first vice president, first black woman.
That black woman nominated Sarah Netburn for this promotion, a judge who isn't even qualified to judge a pie eating contest, not even qualified to judge a pile of shit. How does she still have a job, let alone being considered for a promotion? She still has a job. That woman literally sent a wolf to a hen house, and she says she did the right thing because the wolf's feelings were more important than all of the hens who would be stuck in there with him. The monster she sent to the women's prison was born William McLean, but he now goes by the name July Justine Shelby. He was first convicted in 1994 for his crimes, spent 18 years in prison where he made friends with a fellow inmate who was just as sick and depraved as him, and when they got out, they continued their depravity and were caught sharing images involving infants. I read a description of the images that they had. A baby, an infant. Disgusting. This man has been a predator for going on 30 years now and has shown no signs of rehabilitation, but they have sent him to a women's facility where his records even have him listed as a female. Instinctually, anyone of sound mind can see why housing men, regardless of their gender identity, in a women's facility is absolutely ridiculous. But when you hear the statistics, you realize just how genuinely insane this all is. According to the statistics collected by the U.S. Bureau of Prisons, between 2022 and 2023, there was an approximately 23% increase in federal inmates who identified as transgendered. And of course, majority of those transgender inmates were males who are self-identifying as trans women. Of these males, 47% were in custody for sex offenses. While in contrast, if you look at the general prison population for both men and women who do not identify as trans, just regular men and women, only 12.2% of them were in prison for sex offenses. This means that in America, men who identify as trans are in for sex crimes at almost 4 times the rate of the general population. And here in Canada, we have very similar statistics. Despite these statistics, radical leftists often argue that it is discriminatory to house these men with other men, and they should be allowed to be amongst women where they will feel safe and they will have dignity and bullshit. Truth be told, the reason so many of these men want to be transferred to women's facilities is not because of gender dysphoria. It's because, one, they want the opportunity to reoffend, and two, because of prison politics. An inmate who is locked up for sex offenses will inevitably get street justice from other inmates. If you know what I mean. I don't want to say the words because YouTube, but you know what I'm getting at. They'll get their ass kicked. Heather Mason is a Canadian woman who has spent time in women's prisons at both the provincial level and the federal level. During her time in prison, she was housed with men, and since her release from prison, she has become a women's rights advocate, fighting to keep men out of women's prisons. This is some of what Heather has shared about her experience in the Canadian prison system.
When I was incarcerated in provincial jail in 2015, it's when I first noticed that there was men who identified as women. And I had the laundry job, so I was taken off range Monday to Friday, and the guards would walk me into the laundry because I did the men's laundry. And I always ask so many questions. I always want to know everything. So I would talk to the guards, and they're like, yeah, this person's a sex offender. They don't feel safe on the men's range, so they're hiding out on the women's range. And like the female
These
guards
men who identify as, were they presenting as women? These men?
No.
Oh, okay.
No.
Okay.
Yeah, they still had their penis, but they identified as being a woman.
Okay, so they weren't trying to identify as. These weren't just men who got a special privilege of being in the women's prison. They were actually trying to say that they were women.
Yes. And they all had crimes. So they were hiding from the men because they wouldn't be safe on the men's range, because people who have crimes against women and children are not safe on men's ranges. And when the guards were walking to the laundry job, like I remember the one day them complaining that they had to strip search this guy that was across the hall. And every time they'd strip search him, he would get in a so they didn't want to strip search him. So that was my first experience of that, but I didn't really understand what was going on.
But they still separated you women from these men who identified as women at this point?
Yes.
This is 2015.
Yes. Right. So it hadn't passed into our Canadian Human Rights Act. It was only our provincial Human Rights Act. Okay. And all our provincial jails operate different, whereas our federal, there's policy and procedures and they all are basically the same. When I was transferred to prison is in 2017. So gender identity or expression had just been added into our Canadian Human Rights Act. So there were men there when I got there. And then more and more were transferring in. And then when I was in the halfway house, so after I got released from prison, I had to live in a woman's halfway house in Toronto. And there was a man living there in our halfway house. And then I ended up winning like a scholarship to this conference in Ottawa. So I got my travel and accommodation paid for to attend this conference in Ottawa. So I went. This was June 2019. And while I was there, they passed their inclusion policy. And a woman I knew from prison had gotten up and stated how she was groomed and sexually harassed by a prolific serial pedophile while at Grand Valley, and that it traumatized her and triggered her because she had suffered from childhood sexual abuse. And the women at this conference were like, you don't need a vagina to be a woman, and I don't like the transphobia in this room, and they didn't support her. They dismissed her, and she left crying, and I'm like, what on earth is going on?
So she claims that in prison she was groomed by a man who identified as a woman.
Yeah, Matthew Harks, who's a prolific serial. That weekend was my eye-opener. That's what got me to see what was really going on. Just so people know, our women's prisons are very different than men's prisons. So we live in like cottage-style houses. There's like 9 bedrooms, 2 bathrooms, a kitchen, a dining room, a laundry room, and a living room. There's no cameras in our houses, and the guards only come through once every 2 hours to check on us. So there's a lot of freedom and a lot of ways to get away with things there. These men are not put in segregation. They live in these houses with us. So there have been sexual assaults, there's been grooming, there's been sexual harassment, there's been physical fights, criminal harassment. There have been charges laid. There's been other times where the police have declined to press charges. A lot of the women don't like to speak out. I'll give you an example. So that child that I was talking about earlier, he actually assaulted an Indigenous woman in the bathroom in Grand Valley, the prison I was in. And when the women found out, they locked the door on the house and locked him out. And he couldn't get in the house. So he went to the guard station and he told the guards. And the guards went to the house and they were like, you need to let her in or we're going to put bullying in your parole papers. So you get a parole report and it's given to the board. So if you incur charges or you have bullying in your paperwork or you have anything bad in your paperwork, it can prevent you from getting parole. And the one thing these women want are to get out and to be with their family and their kids, right? So this deters women from doing anything about it, just taking it and not telling.
And this other man who, the Adam Lubican, I don't know how to pronounce his last name, but he was the man who raped an infant and then was moved to the women's prison in Canada because he said he identified as a woman, and he was actually moved to prison that has a mother-baby unit. And some of the women there who were able to, spend time with their babies during visitation would say that he would just stand outside of the room and make them feel uncomfortable, intimidate them. I mean, this is really happening. This is really a man, really a that is in a women's prison harassing women who are incarcerated and their babies.
Yeah. So another difference with the women's prisons compared to the men's is we have the mother-child program. So our children 4 years and younger can live with us full time. And all our women's prisons in Canada have those. We have 6 women's prisons. They will stand outside the mother-child house and antagonize the women and stare at their babies. And there's nothing the women can do. So one woman confronted Tara. So Adam goes by Tara DeSouza. And they ended up getting into a fight because this woman called Adam. And Adam picked her up and threw her, beat her up. Wow. And the guards wouldn't do anything about it because she called him. It's like, well, he is a pedophile, and this is what the general public would call him.
There's so much emphasis on the feelings and the safety of these male inmates who identify as trans, but to also argue the safety concerns of the actual women is dismissed as bigotry.
I couldn't imagine being in a situation where nobody can hear you, right? Where everything you say is getting shut down. Prison is a microcosm of what's actually happening in the world. It's a smaller version. It's exactly what's happening to society, right? We're watching this as a whole. I was born in 1984. I've seen the changes. I have a 5-year-old daughter. I don't want her to grow up in a world that's currently backwards or upside down. And I'd explain to my 5-year-old daughter, hey, daddy works around monsters. These are monsters. So you give them a green light and a pass to go into these women's facilities, they're chomping at the bits. And the role of a correctional officer, you know, they're simply there opening and unlocking gates. They know it's not right. They know in their heart it's not right. They reach out to me. They are inmates in our custody. And if you're purposely putting a predator amongst prey, so to say, I don't gotta tell you what's gonna happen. You know what's gonna happen.
Anyways, that's all I have for this video. If you liked it, please don't forget to hit the like button, because when you do, it helps other people find my videos. It really helps with the algorithm. So please, 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 if you made it to this point in the video, don't forget to hit that like button. If you guys would like to see more videos, I will have 2 more videos just like this in the end cards. I will see you guys in the next one. Take care. Bye.